depth-based fog. This is something that you should be using in your Unreal Engine project, be it a game, a cinematic, or anything like that. It could be the difference between having a shot that looks very atmospheric and one that looks very bland. And in this tutorial today, I'm going to show you how to create a post-process material that's very simple yet very effective in order to add more atmosphere to your scene. This can work in conjunction with the Exponential Height Fog, but it gives you so much more control over what happens in your immediate vicinity and also in the background. So we can control the foreground and the background at the same time. This is actually a very useful tool and I use it all the time. It's part of my Atmos Forge project, which is also in the Cloud Forge or the World Forge. So here we have the World Forge project in which I am using this custom fog that I'm going to show you how to create. Now in the World Forge, as you can see, there is fog in the background. And it's all controlled through this blueprint, the Atmos Forge. Now, it doesn't matter if you have a blueprint or not, we're going to create a material that's going to allow us to have this fog. Let me show you how the fog actually works. So over here in the Atmos Forge where I control the fog, I have a section called Complex Fog, which is this system. Now, the options that you're going to have in the material instance that we're going to create are going to be to invert the fog. So instead of showing up there in the background, we can press this button and then it will switch over to where we are. Now, as you see, while I'm doing things right now, nothing is really changing. And this is because I have to tell Unreal Engine that I want the Atmos Forge to run in real time. So if I go in here and I enable this, you'll now notice that any option that I press will now have an effect. And as you can see, when we do this, the fog basically transfers from over there to over here. But let's just see how the system works. So basically we have the opacity, which allows us to make the fog be a lot more prominent or less prominent. We also have a fog transition, which is allowing us to create a sharp edge or a shallow edge between the area that's in fog and the area that's not. And also a fog thickness that kind of basically acts as a distance of fog buildup. So for example, if we decrease this number, the fog will get a lot closer to us, which sounds a little bit counterintuitive, but it does work. So if we now increase the fog opacity, you can see everything is almost completely dark. We can actually even go like that and then we can't see anything. And now if we, play around with the fog thickness, you can see just how the fog moves up and down as we change these values. And then we can also play around with the fog transition if we want a steeper change or a more gradual one like what we see right now. We also want to obviously change the color. So I'm going to increase, brighten up the color and maybe change it to something a little bit more foggy or, something maybe like in, that movie, what was it, Blade Runner? So, something like that, for example. So you could easily create a Blade Runner look with this system, which is why I find it to be really, really cool and very, very easy to set up and use, actually. And as you can see, it has so many different applications. And if you invert it, then this is allowing us to completely engulf everything else in fog like that. Obviously, it's a bit too strong, so we do want to reduce the opacity and maybe reduce the fog transition. So as you can see, now we have fog in the foreground, but there's no fog there in the distance. In case this is something that you want to art direct in this particular way, so I've created this system in order to run like that, basically, right? This is what's allowing us to, again, art direct our scene, or we can invert again to have it in the background instead of the foreground. So I've just quickly created a dummy level of the World Forge just so we can test it out. We only have a directional light and a sky atmosphere here, but no fog to speak of. So let's create our material now. What we're going to do is we're going to create a new material, call it m_fog tutorial. We're also going to right click it and create a material instance to use for later. Now we're going to double click the material and open its window. And over in here, we now want to start putting up the nodes. But before we do that, we need to change the material domain. So I'm going to change it from a surface over to a post-process. And now we need to change the blend mode. Basically, the blend mode needs to be something that allows us to have an opacity on our material, because right now we only have an emissive color and we need the opacity in order to control the strength of our fog. So we need to change this to an alpha composite pre-multiplied alpha, but unfortunately it won't let us change it. So in order to fix this, just scroll down over where it says here the after tone mapping, change this over to before tone mapping, and then also take the output alpha. which then allows us over in here to select the alpha composite. And this is where we wanted to get to, because now we can add our nodes, which is not a lot to talk about. I mean, there's only a couple of nodes for us to work. We have the emissive color and the opacity to worry about. So let's begin with the first node. Effectively, there are two components to our fog. There is the color of the fog and then the opacity of the fog. The most important part of this all is the actual opacity of the fog. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually create an opacity slider. What I mean by this is we're going to add a scalar parameter. We're going to call this fog opacity, and we're going to give it the default value of 0.5, and this feeds straight into the opacity. And there we have it. We now have opacity for the fog. I know it's very simple, but it's basically how we control the fog. But this opacity number here will also control where the, how the color shifts as well. So what I mean by this is we're actually going to create a material function here that's going to allow us to sample the scene depth, so we can use the opacity and and decide where does the fog start from and where does it end, basically. So we're going to go in here and going to create a new material function, going to call it mf depth fog, okay? And then we're going to open this material function, and very quickly in here, we are going to add a screen position because we are interested to take the viewport UVs. And we are then going to add a scene depth. So we're now analyzing the scene depth based on our viewport coordinates. We are then going to add a divide node, and we want to divide the scene depth by depth level. So we're going to add in here, well, not a scalar parameter. We're actually going to add a function input, and this is going to be a scalar function input, and we're going to call this depth level, or you could call it a depth transition or whatever you want to call it. And we're going to saturate the value here between 0 to 1, and we're going to put it into the output result. Now you can see in here that we do have an error, and basically what is the reason why we have an error over here, it's actually because it says here that's only transparent or post-processing materials can read from the scene depth. And in order for us to fix that, you just want to go over here and change this to translucent, and then you no longer have an issue at all. Just press apply and move on. So we're back into our material in here, and we can actually add the new material function that we created. Okay, and this material function, we need a depth level control. So we're going to add a new scalar parameter, and we're going to call it fog depth, okay, or fog thickness, or whatever you want to call it. And we're going to plug this over like that. Now we do want to add a static switch parameter, well, a static switch over here, and this because we want to also be able to invert this depth in order to invert our fog. So we're going to add a new 1- node here, and we're going to plug this in. So if this is true, then we invert, and if this is false, then we keep it as it is. Now we need in here a static Boolean parameter, and we're going to call this it's going to be a question, invert fog. So if the fog is inverted, then we use the true value, and if it's not, then we use the false. Now this switch is going to move into a divide, and we're going to put it over like that. And we want to add a fog transition here. So we are going to call this fog transition, which is going to allow us to basically make the transition smoother or more, sharp between the area that's fogged and the area that's not. And now we want to also add a multiply node, and we want to multiply this divide node by the opacity that we have. And this will also feed into a saturate node. Okay, now we're not going to connect this straight into the emissive color because we need to also determine our color of the fog. So to do that, we're going to add hold 3 on the keyboard, left click, right click this color and convert it to a parameter, and we're going to call it fog color like that. Now obviously you want to give it a default color to whatever you like. And once we do that, we are going to put it into a lerp node. So this is going to go into the B value, and into the alpha we're going to put our saturate like that. Let me just put that in there, and then this is going to collect into the emissive color. Now our setup is not yet done because we also need to take a texture scene post-process input. So we're going to look for a scene texture, okay, and we're going to connect the color over into the A value. We're also going to change from scene color to post-process input 0. Now you're going to notice that we have a problem because this is a float 4 and this is a float 3, and you basically can't, do an arithmetic between these values. So what we want to do, actually, I think this is a flow 3 and this is a 4. Yeah, sorry. So anyway, what we want to do is we want to mask. So we're going to add a component mask over here, and we're going to connect our color over into this mask, and then this is going to connect into the A value over there. And what we want to do is just do RGB like that, okay? Then we're going to press apply, and now we're going to go back into our level because it's time to apply the fog. Oh, and don't forget, guys, the World Forge project and the Atmos Forge is available on my Patreon for the price of a coffee, or available on Fab if you'd like to give it a go. It basically is going to support the channel if you do end up getting it. It's actually a passion project of mine that I am looking to develop further and further, with update 1.1 right around the corner, bringing some amazing new features and shader improvements, which is going to take nanite displacement to a whole new level, unlike anything you've seen on the marketplace so far. Applying the fog is very straightforward. We are going to add a post-process volume, drop into the world. Now make sure here at the bottom of the post-process volume, you click on the infinite extent button. And then above, where you can see an option in here where it has rendering features like this, you want to look for post-process materials, and under this array, press the plus button. Now choose asset reference here, and then we can actually drop our material instance for the fog right into this slot. And we can open the material instance to then control our newly created fog. Now, as you can see, the values are not great. They're not allowing us to properly see what we're doing. So playing around with the values is going to either make or break the fog. So we want to put this to like a 0.1. and reduce the fog opacity maybe a little bit so we can see the scene. Now the fog transition is where most of the magic happens. So as you sort of like play around with this setting, you'll notice that the fog is either a lot brighter or a lot less, or a lot stronger or a lot less strong. But we need to basically push it further. So we're going to increase this fog depth by quite a lot. And as you can see, at some point the fog goes away like that. And then we can now increase the fog opacity and maybe even change that transition so it becomes a bit more gradual or sharper. I'm just going to leave it something like that. And then I'm going to push it even further, and I'm going to increase its opacity. So now you can see we have fog in the distance and no fog where we are. So this is probably around the line where we have the fog coming to. And we can also invert it. So if we press the invert fog, you can see it's now switched sides. So it's now on this side and not on that side. I'm just going to put it back to where it was. Obviously, the fog color is where we can control how the fog looks like, and it has such a massive impact on the scene atmosphere, this very, very simple material tweak, that it's actually phenomenal to be used in any particular project, in any game or whatever, because it's very simple, very cost effective, and it gets the job done. It's obviously not a volumetric effect, but it is still a very simple, very powerful effect indeed. Now you might be tempted to ask, why the hell should we do this? Why not just use the height, volume? Like, for example, why wouldn't you just go over to volumes over here, or sorry, to cinematic? No, it's not. Actually, it's in visual effects. I keep forgetting. And just adding an exponential height fog. Why not just do that? Well, the problem with an exponential height fog is that it is global. Basically, it's affecting everything everywhere. It's not going to make any kind of, you cannot really control it. You can use that for the background, but you're not really going to be able to have multiple height fogs like this, exponential height fogs, unless you have a system to basically disable one and enable another one as your character walks through the world. But here, what I've done now is I've added 2 post-process volumes, which are no longer using infinite extent as an option, but instead one of them is using a red volume, and the other one is using a blue volume. So if I press play right here, you'll notice that there is no fog, but as I walk through into the first post-process, the entire volume is now allowed for the fog to be red, and then when I can move over into here, it will now switch over to blue, and it will have a nice transition. So basically you can have as many of these post-process volumes around the world as you'd like, and each of them can have its own atmosphere, its own level of of the volume, of how it functions and its own settings. And this is where that's very, very powerful. And this is something that the exponential height fog cannot do unless you go through a very meticulous setup process, which I don't know, I wouldn't really recommend. But like I've said, this system is not volumetric. It's not volumetric as the exponential height fog. So you may want to use that in conjunction with this in order to get the desired effect. And that's all I have to show for the fog and this system in place that I've got in the Atmos Forge. If you want to support the channel, please feel free to buy me a coffee on Patreon by subscribing to one of the tiers and get access to over 50-60 projects right now that you could use in your own workflow. They are all very much explained. They've got tutorials, they've got all sorts of things. But a shout out to all of my other Patreons that have been supporting me throughout this whole time. I really appreciate it, guys. I hope to release the new World Forge update 1.1 very soon, the Cloud Forge update very soon, the Atmos Forge update very soon. I'm also working on a brand new project called the Surface Forge, which I think a lot of people will really love. But yeah, stay tuned and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you for watching.